in-depth look at specific bureaus and specific departments and some of the funds that have been encumbered but not spent, and try to help our departments and get to the bottom of what has held up spending of money. We certainly saw some further work on this in our local media over the break. We saw a Times article that I know a lot of Angelenos were asking about, ongoing numbers that have been coming from our departments, from our CAO, from our controller, and others, tracking this money, which is critical for us to be spending out as we still continue to have unemployment, budget problems, and the need for our infrastructure. My goal, and what I asked for the first one to be, was to look at public works and street services. Bill Robertson is here if you want to come up and join us, who is the amazing director of our Bureau of Street Services. With a lot of my colleagues, we've been privately talking about what a joy it's been to work with you over the last few years, Bill, and we appreciate that you always tell it like it is, and that you always seem to find a way to use resources to help us when we've never had enough resources for our streets to at least hang on. And so I want to thank you for that. I've spent some time out, as you know, with your crews over the break after the rains, and it's on a lot of Angelenos' minds. I think it was the combination of knowing there's still dollars to be spent and knowing that we have good crews and knowing that we have a lot of damage on our streets. I thought we would start with street services. After that, another director of one of our bureaus who I've recently spent a little time with, Ed Ibrahimian, will be here talking to us about the Bureau of Street Lighting as well, and some of the things. So why don't we jump into street services, get the overview, and then we can kind of dig into some of the specifics of where we're at with our ARA funds.
Good morning, Councilman. Bill Robertson, Director of the Bureau of Street Services. With me this morning are Mr. Ron Oliver, our Assistant Director, and Shirley Lau, who has actually been the head of our ARA program and has actually weathered 8 federal highway reviews so far.
And has the scars to show.
Yeah, and outstanding job, and I think the Federal Highway Administration is very pleased with the results of their findings and our ability to move these projects forward. As you know, Councilman, the City of Los Angeles received ARA, or stimulus dollars. We allocated $45 million to resurfacing, another $12 million to some pedestrian projects. And I just want to add that...
just real quick, because I know we know these things, but for the folks who are listening, what pots of money did these come from? Were they competitive? Were they done by formula per jurisdiction? How did we get those pots of money, and what sort of projects could they have been used for, when we, even though we chose those?
Yes, the process for the ARA was very difficult. There were a number of requirements. First of all, the city, my bureau, had exactly 10 days to put together a $45 million program for resurfacing and the $12 million for the pedestrian improvement projects. These streets, first of all the streets selected for the resurfacing side had to be federal segments, had to be identified and accepted by the Federal Highway Administration. So that, of course, limited the number of streets that we had available to begin with. Secondly...
And what does that entail, their acceptance? Do they come out and see that they have some federal impact? Do they look at the damage of them? I mean, what does that entail?
Well, actually, a number of years ago, as streets are put into the system, they're either a local street or they're designated as a federal segment, which allows federal dollars to be spent on those segments.
And I'm sorry, just because I want to make sure folks have that. What are examples of those secondary kind of federal highways, and
yes,
what would be some of those street names, for instance, for somebody? Is that like a Ventura Boulevard or a Beverly Boulevard? Or
it would be a Victory Boulevard out in the valley. It might be a Western Avenue. Here on the metro side. So it's primarily a number of our major streets. Some locals are actually included in the system. So that was the other requirement. And most importantly, all these projects had to be what the federal government termed as shovel-ready. That means it limited us to basically what we refer to as a overlay or grind and pave. In other words, we couldn't use these dollars for full reconstruction, would then require an environmental impact study. So if you had to do the environmental, it meant that it wasn't shovel ready, you couldn't move forward. So the fact that we're dealing strictly with the federal segments, and then again with the fact that they already had to be in our program or available. The other aspect was the utility holes. We had to go with the number of the streets that we knew that we already had utility clearances on. So it was a very difficult program to put together. The good news is that within 75 days, we had actually started the first project. And fortunately for the City of Los Angeles, we had started all of our projects because the federal government decided to change the guidelines midstream and wanted contractors to do all the work. And we've, as I mentioned, we've gone through 8 reviews. It's been verified by the feds that our force account work is meeting the requirements, all our testing, our lab testing. So we're thrilled to death that we were able to get this first round of federal dollars. The bad
So we got an
news is-
exemption on that?
Pardon me?
So that requirement that they all be outside contractors, we had an exemption on, or how did that?
Yes, we were exempted. The bad news is that the federal government now has made a decision that any future work, any future stimulus dollars that come available, they want that to go to outside contracting. There's still a slight possibility for an exemption, but that would have to be last resort. So the city's very fortunate that we were able to get the waiver and move forward with these projects. And as you can see from the reports on the resurfacing, we're well above where we had anticipated we would be. Our goal for both the pedestrian projects and the resurfacing projects is for us to complete all those projects by June 2012. So we're on schedule, actually ahead of schedule, and the projects are moving forward.
So when you envisioned this, you envisioned a 3-year program? Is that?
Yes. When we went into the program, we decided, because when you look at the total resurfacing program, or what we refer to as our pavement preservation program, which is about $94 million, the ARA funding is only about $15 million per year. So it's a small portion of the dollars. So when we plan our work, we have to include the 1B funding we use, gas tax, the Prop C, and all the other funding sources. So this is just one pot of money that we intermingle with all the others in order to be efficient in our operations.
So what would you say to the casual observer who says, oh my God, we're in a recession, this is important, we've got a crumbling infrastructure, we've got some extra money, why wouldn't we go and spend that in the first year? Even if that meant a combination of city workers and outside workers, and why don't you explain and take this moment to kind of explain to the public what our thinking is in the city as to why we did a 3-year program?
Well, what we did, and historically, and it goes back to looking at the actual budget for our pavement preservation over a number of years. In good years, we threw a lot of money at it. In bad years, we didn't have a lot of money, and we would go up and down, up and down, up and down. So the benefit to the overall system was very, very limited. We got together with the approval of the council and the mayor and put together a 4-year program at a lower dollar amount than maybe a lot of people thought we should be spending. But we looked at what the impact to the street system would be over that 4-year period, including the ARA dollars, 1B, gas tax, and any other funding that would become available. The reality was we were able to use this funding, spread it over 4 years, the total funding, and the ARA specifically over 3 years as one of the funding sources. And for the first time since World War II, we're actually going to improve the street system. It's a minor improvement, but our history
In other words,
is...
we're not going to fall further behind. Our pace will exceed the pace of the crumbling of the streets.
Yes, and that's historic in itself because we've never done that since World War II. Every year our street system has gotten worse. So by managing the funding and managing the maintenance of the streets, we're now on a straight line and starting to actually get an improvement in the system.
So I appreciate that, but again, to that question, why wouldn't we, for instance, I assume if there's some streets we could have done on year 1 that are going to be done year 2, year 3, there's more damage that happens, storms like what happened occurred. Why would we wait with the additional funds and not, for instance, was it the preservation, which there may be good answers to this, I'm not hostile to this approach, I just want to know what the thinking is. Is it that we retain more city workers by stretching it out over 3 years? Is it that we don't, even if we went to outside contractors, we simply couldn't because of utility holds and other things? What were the reasons why we decided a 3-year program?
One of the key issues that we have in the city of Los Angeles, and one of the requirements is before we resurface any street, we have to give the utility companies, and there's 200 of those that maintain structures in our street system, we have to give them 1 year advance notice that we are planning work. And the one thing we don't want to do is go out and spend stimulus dollars resurfacing a street and then 6 weeks later have a utility company come in and start digging up the street. So that was one of the requirements that made us spread it over a 3-year period, because we had to give those utility companies that 1 year advance notice. And that's actually part of the street damage restoration ordinance. So we're mandated to do that. So there's no way possible that we could have said, okay, let's spend all $45 million this year. That was one of the requirements. The second thing is that we also have 1B money that is special funds, and also has eligibility and deadlines that we have to meet. So if we had thrown all $45 million in the first year, in year 2 or 3, we may have been in trouble in spending our 1B money, because it has deadlines also. So you have to manage your funding sources over a period of time to make sure that you meet these deadlines and don't lose any of those valuable dollars.
So bottom line, even with outside contractors, we wouldn't have had the capacity to move more quickly given those constraints?
That's correct.
Okay. According to this chart, we were supposed to be, I think this was in November, about 47% of the way done with this 3-year program, and we're at 59%, which is roughly about 25% ahead of schedule. Will we continue that, in your opinion? Will that level off and go back to the red line? Will it go back to the blue, or will we finish about 9 months ahead if we keep that pace up?
Our goal naturally is to finish on time and above the line. However, we understand that there will be fluctuations in each month depending on the climate. We've got historic rain this year for La Nina, and when nobody expected this rain, so we've lost a number of days just to rain. As we move into our rainy season, where January to April, where we may see some more rain, we may see a drop in our ability to get production. But we feel very comfortable that by June 30th we will have met our goals for this year, and certainly meeting the goal for June 2012 is really not an issue.
Couple other questions. Going back to what you said, that this was the first year since World War II, we exceeded the pace of the degradation of our streets through improvements. By what percent? Is it 1-2%? Is it?
We're actually going to see the PCI, and as you know, right, Councilman, our PCI is where all our streets are rated 1 to 100. Our average PCI in the city of Los Angeles, when we started our pavement preservation program, was at a 62, and it remains at a 62. At the end of the 4-year period, we're going to see the PCI actually climb to about a 63 or a 63 and a half. It's a small improvement, but again, the historical fact is it's the first time we've ever done that. So
we're on our way from a D- to a D.
Yes.
All right. But that is an important turnaround, and obviously over time that's an important hill to climb, and congratulations on being able to get there. Another thing that's been raised, and I know it's a very tricky question for you as a bureau director, has been our furloughs. And if we did not have furloughs, let's say across the board for a moment, which I know is not happening immediately, but if we did not have furloughs across the board, would we be able to accelerate this timeline even more?
Yes, it's possible. Again, we manage all our funding sources. And as you well know, in our operational world, especially in the resurfacing, we count on 220 operational days a year. Those are paving days. Those are the days we hit it hard. And when you lose 26 of those days, it puts a huge impact on your ability to get the work done. So we're managing through that. Unfortunately, we've had to use some overtime to make up the loss of those 26 days of availability for our crews.
So we're furloughing, but then paying the overtime to kind of make it up?
Yes, and we do it at a limited pace, and we primarily use the overtime for those major projects. It just makes it much more difficult to manage. But despite the 26 days, we feel very strongly that we're going to meet the goals and spend the money by June of 2012.
loss of 26, those days, the proposal for the balancing of the rest of this year's budget of potentially 10 more furlough days, I assume would make pretty significant cuts in that pace as well for you?
Yes, it would. A huge impact. Of course, naturally, as I mentioned, we manage the funding sources, so it may shift our focus to where if we lose 10 additional days, we're going to say, okay, let's kind of regroup and let's focus on the ARA projects as much as possible, and then the 1B because it has eligibility deadlines, and then our third priority would be the spending of the gas tax. We would mix that in with those two funding sources to make sure that we're still being cost effective in the way we do the work.
What percentage of your crew's funding comes from those special sources versus the general fund?
I think the misunderstanding about the funding, what is a true special fund? The only true special fund I have is the ARA dollars, which not only pays the direct cost of the individual, but the indirect costs, as well as all the overheads and whatnot. Gas tax, while viewed as a special tax, is not a special fund, is not a true special fund, because we don't recoup 100% of that cost. It may be 80 to 85%. Same with the 1B dollars. So ARA is the only true funding source. So what that means to the public is that even though we're using gas tax, because of the overheads, employee benefits, there is still an impact to the general fund, because the general fund has to pick up those overheads and some of the employee benefits.
I'm sure you spent a lot of time and headache and heartache on this, but do you feel that there is no way to peg that percentage and come to us as policymakers and say, can you reduce furloughs at least by 80%?
That's one of the options that are available. We actually, when the furloughs started, we made that report showing that while certainly the ARA was the only true special funds, that certainly we could reduce furloughs based on the percentages of that employees are on gas tax or on 1B or the other funding sources that we have that are kind of semi-special funded. So we'd be more than willing to do that again, to submit the information. We feel confident, and one of the critical things as we move forward and we talk about the additional 10 days of furloughs, I believe at this critical time in the city's history, they need to let general managers manage. Because the reality is, I believe that I can actually absorb the 10 days of furloughs through efficiencies and other cuts that don't impact the very critical services I deliver. I feel strongly that I can actually absorb the 10 days. So we don't have to serve them and give up the money. So we have to have that ability to manage each of the general managers. Not everybody's going to be able to do it, but certainly there are some reductions if we move forward on the 10 days.
That's been one of my worries, and I understand this when things are moving rapidly and we have issues to consider with our labor partners and others, that sometimes there's an axe that's brought in rather than a scalpel to make the savings, and sometimes we get no savings from the cuts we've made, except we cut services for the people of Los Angeles. So I want to get back to that in a moment, and just what your interactions with the CEO's office has been there, or, and/or with council committees, because I think we do have to revisit that and steer through that. But I want to go back to one thing that you said that I don't want to gloss over either. You did say if more were added, you could accelerate some of the ARA dollars. So you do have the ability somewhat in this 3-year plan, even though you said there's a lot of impediments, and that's why it had to be a 3-year plan, to possibly front-load more of that ARA. Now that we're in and you've been able to do some of the planning for those streets, there are streets that are lined up for 6 months from now, a year from now, maybe even a year and a half from now, that you could bring in currently to this fiscal year's program, you believe?
Yes. The key is the utility clearances.
Right.
And, of course, when you're dealing with utility clearances, the projects that we submitted to the federal government, some of those are going to come back with utility holes. We've already seen that, but fortunately we had other streets that we had submitted that did come through with clearances, and now take that place. if furloughs were done away with, and certainly I could accelerate the dollars, or the spending of the ARA dollars, and we could probably even beat that June 2012 deadline to expend all those dollars. Again, the key thing is we have to manage all the funding sources, because while I might be able to accelerate the ARA dollars, I certainly don't want to lose eligibility on the 1B dollars.
Of course.
Because why ARA is $45 million, the 1B dollars is over $120 million.
Right.
And it's something we have to watch very closely, that we're expending those dollars as well.
And that gas tax stays steady no matter what the price of gas is, correct?
Yeah, and the fortunate thing about gas tax, you don't lose
percentage, right?
Yeah.
There's sometimes that misunderstanding I've talked to a number of constituents about. Well, as you know, Mr. Weezer and I introduced a motion on furloughs around special funds, and this has been a headache of mine that I'm committed to working with the CAO on. I understand the CAO saying, well, if we can't peg it exactly, we can't do it at all, whereas I think we comfortably know it's 80-85%, even if we were to reduce by half and say, look, give us a huge fudge factor, we're able to get workers to work, we're able to provide critical services and not endanger the general fund. So what has been, when you submitted that report, has the CAO, and I'm not looking, I know you have some freedoms that maybe you didn't have a week ago, which we'll discuss at the end, but what has been the holdup, and maybe the CAO can let us know why that's not achievable? But go ahead, give us your side of the story first.
Of course, I do have certain freedoms now that I didn't previously, but the reality is we've worked very closely with the CAO, and it's difficult sometimes for just not me, but any department to understand what they're dealing with, because I'm dealing with my small world, they're dealing with the city as a whole. So they have been very open, they have been very honest with me on what they need, and I'm sure the CAO would state too, my bureau is one of the first to offer up and try to meet the things that need to be done to benefit the entire city. So we have a good relationship. We continue to work together. We're hoping that we can twist their arm and they'll allow us to move forward with some of the plans that we have.
You take one arm, I'll take the other. We'll get it done. It'll be fine. We'll get this done. No, and the CAO, you're exactly right. The CAO's office is dealing with has the most difficult job in the city right now, and we do recognize that. I also think that we can help and we can potentially find ways to make this happen. But let's hear what's been.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Mr. Chair, Councilman Rosendahl. John Chavez with the CAO's office. As you know, there was a motion that was introduced, and speaking with Councilman Weezar's office, it's supposed to be heard Public Works Committee probably the last week of this month. I think the issues at stake here, well, as Mr. Robertson was saying, there's a bunch of special funding sources, and they have to operate. Having someone that's working on a street resurfacing project in the morning could be potentially working on lot cleaning in the afternoon. So there's that juggling act that goes on. I guess the issues that they face is they cannot identify for one employee 90% special funding. That's one issue. And as Bill mentioned a second ago, they cannot recover 100% of their costs either on certain funds. So we will be working with them on preparing a report to kind of outline that, provide the council with a little bit more detail on that, because based on those facts, it cannot. Everybody in the department right now is being furloughed. So that's something that we have to kind of really look at the details, create a table, look at the special funding sources, their labor forces, and see if there's any way of exempting people from furloughs, which to date has been very difficult due to their operations.
If they, from a management perspective, though, can figure out a way to do that absorption of what their general fund obligation is, does that give the CAO's office enough comfort that they will not increase this deficit this year and, in fact, will meet their, from the general fund, and in fact will meet their obligations under this year's budget, which I know other departments haven't?
Sure, we're open to having that kind of a conversation and letting them manage if based on the circumstances. So yeah, we'll be discussing those particular issues. To date, I mean, that's been the department's position, is that they cannot, that everyone has to be furloughed because of the fact they cannot identify 90% funding per employee, and some of the funds don't provide for full 100% cost recovery.
I agree with that, but there's a huge percentage between 0 and 90. So, I mean, what's your, do you have any employees that are 100% general funded?
Yes.
Okay, so you have a few of those. What do you think your average employee is, general versus special?
Well, I would say when you look at our organization, our primary general fund goes to our lot cleaning division and our investigation enforcement. That's where the bulk. Then you still have general fund spread through the administration part and there. The operational side, and especially when you look at resurfacing and the motor sweeping and those types of things, they have combinations of funding that fund them. So John makes a good point. While gas tax may recover 80%, I think what the CAO is looking at, and correct me if I'm wrong, John, is they want 90% to feel comfortable that the impact is minimal to the general fund.
To get rid of all the furloughs, but my point is there has to be, I mean, there's nothing more important, I think, for the Bureau and for the CAO to assist in as this motion moves forward, and for you to do if you haven't done it, than to be able to, you know, you can do this, I think, with simple math, with looking at, you know, the percentage that comes in from special fund and general fund, number of employees you have, figuring out kind of what that average employee is, and then putting in some sort of factor that will make all of us as policymakers in the CAO know that it's under that. So let's say, I'm just pulling this out of nowhere, it's 60% is from special funds and 40% is general fund. I think it's probably, that's probably low. But if we got rid of 40% of the furloughs, we're comfortable there. I mean, we're not going to blow anything into the deficit of the general fund, and that's 40% more working days, 40% more streets paved, 40% more repair done in the city. I don't see I see an urgency to do that.
Yep. Councilman, just for the record, out of their entire budget, general fund constitutes maybe 14%. So
there we go. So maybe, you know, 70% of the furloughs we could have all. Something where there's a safety factor. Now for employees that are obviously much higher, we would have to have the understanding that the Bureau could absorb that, so that it's, and I think I heard you say that you can. I mean, you're able to shift enough resources around where you can increase some people's special fund projects rather than general fund ones, and make sure that that doesn't blow even the smallest of holes into this year's deficit. So I think there's a real urgency around that, and anything we can do in preparation for that committee hearing to really get those numbers. I'm prepared to support something. I'd like to encourage the CAO to give yourself a little bit of insurance. So we're not trying to, if it's 82%, that there's, you know, 82% of the furloughs are abolished. But, you know, with some wiggle room, if you give yourself 10 or 20 or whatever percent under that, I think that is something that is a decent compromise and a safe budgeting technique. And I think we've been so scared because it's not 100%, we go to 0 and we get nothing out of those furlough days.
Okay,
Mr. Rosendahl?
Good morning. And first, I want to thank Eric Garcetti for being the pothole king, as Miss Wendy was the pothole queen. But the reality is that your work is critical to the core mission of our great city.
Yes, it is.
And you, in particular, have been quite a spokesperson out there in the community, explaining to community the realities of how you need to go forward. I'll never forget, we talked about fixing sidewalks. You told me, Councilman, it would be 83 years, and then we talked about bonding, and it was $2.3 billion and all this kind of stuff. Of course, we put that on hold at this particular moment. And I did see the beginnings and then the fixing of a lot of potholes in the 11th District, and I'm very grateful for that, and so are my constituents grateful for that. The one comment you made about the stimulus money and furloughs and layoffs and getting things done. If we avoid any more furloughs in your world, in your core mission, you will be able to accelerate or use in a more timely manner the federal money. Is that true?
Yes, and let me be clear, because if we're talking about two different things, certainly if I serve 10 more furlough days, we're going to manage it and somehow we'll get through it. The key is to accelerate the spending of the stimulus dollars would to be certainly avoid 10 additional days this year, as well as avoiding any furloughs for next year. Those would be the keys. That would allow us...
I'd say that again.
If we can avoid this year the 10 additional days and avoid any furloughs next year, we'll be able to accelerate the spending of those federal dollars.
Okay, with those federal dollars, and if you can avoid the furloughs, that federal dollars will pay for what?
Basically, when you look at, again, it being the sole true special fund. In other words, when I spend our dollars, it has no impact to the general fund.
Right.
So that's the key.
But the key is, can an employee that might have been furloughed be paid out of that money and therefore not need to be furloughed?
Yes, yes.
So why would we furlough your folks if it's not going to impact the general fund, if the stimulus money would cover them? What would be the logic in doing that?
Well, I think, again, when we look at the entire funding sources that I have for resurfacing,
right,
the reality is this. If I accelerated the ARA dollars, put all the resurfacing folks on all ARA dollars, they would expend that money probably within 6 months.
Good.
So now, what do I do? How do I pay them for the next 6 months? Do I lay them off? So the reality is, without
the savings of the general fund money that you did not have to use could be there in the next year, conceivably, to keep them on the payroll. In other words, why lay off somebody if we can pay for them with federal stimulus dollars? I mean, there is much an important job for that individual, but obviously for the services they provide for the community. So help.
No, absolutely. And again, the tough thing, and I have to admit sometimes I don't even understand it, and John will verify that.
I'm going to ask John to reflect on this question as well, please.
But, you know, we're passionate about paving the streets. We do have to manage the various funding sources. We don't want to impact the general fund, or at least we want to minimize the impact to the general fund, because as long as there are a deficit there, even if I put those guys on 6 months of ARA and we save that bunch of general fund dollars, it's going to be gone towards the deficit. It's not going to be there for me to spend in the future.
Right.
So,
Councilman Rosendahl,
yes.
Bill doesn't have any general fund dollars for his resurfacing program. It's all ARA or other
So if that's the case, if it's special funds or ARA funds, why would we even consider furloughing folks who are in those modes?
Once again, because the fact is that street services has to be flexible in the way that they use their special funds, and so they cannot identify people today to just work almost exclusively on ARA or Prop 1B or gas tax. They have to kind of spread that around, so the percentage might be 30, 40, something like that. That's one thing. And then the special funds don't pay the full freight. They don't pay for 100% of the city's indirect cost, and that represents a burden on the general fund. So right now, their department, every single employee in street services is furloughed. But we are willing to discuss that and look at that a little bit closely and be prepared later on in the month, the Public Works Committee, to discuss if there are other options to minimize those furloughs.
Yeah, I would like you to do that and report back, and I know Mr. Garcetti was saying the same thing in that context there. The bottom line is this: if we have federal stimulus dollars now, I want to spend those now. I don't appreciate the fact that we rank not first in spending our money, and we don't rank second or third or fourth. I don't even know what the thing is. I'm going to ask Jim Clark that question. But, you know, criticism I get from my constituents, frankly, is you got the money, you're not spending it, and you're cutting back on services. Help us through that, they're saying to me, and that's obviously an issue for us all to appreciate. So when it goes back to Public Works, I'd like to see you come back to us in whatever format, be it Public Works or this committee here. I want to spend that federal money now. And I don't want to hold back for any reason whatsoever, even if the general fund issue is the issue. That money is money sitting there that I want to pay for workers who are doing public services that are critical to everybody. And frankly, we have the weirdest weather in the world right now all over the place. Obviously, I'm glad I'm not in Australia at the moment with the floods. But look what we've just been through here. We've been through a lot of rain, more rain in a given period of time in some areas and recorded and so on and so forth. And now we have the Santa Ana winds in. It's drying up in a minute and a half. And then who knows, it goes up to the 70s or 80s, then it might go down to the 30s or 40s or 50s, rain again. In other words, we're all impacted by climate change, in my opinion, and I think the dollar spent right now on resurfacing streets is a critical part of what we need to do. And I don't see this all of a sudden becoming a wonderful moment. I think we're going to continue to have this until we clean up our act in terms of global warming, but that's another issue. But it's very important from our perspective that those federal ARA dollars are spent in a more accelerated way than they presently are. And if the furlough layoff business impacts the spending of it, we have to see where it does impact the spending of it and not let that be the case. I would rather take the federal money and get out there and continue to spend it and ask for more. We have a congressional delegation that appreciates that California is a donor state. We give $50 billion more to Washington every year than we get back. It's outrageous that these little states get $1.15 for every buck they put in, and we get 87 cents. It's unacceptable. Okay, I'm very happy with the mayor's Measure R leadership and with Congressman Dreyer, who I spoke with, who said it's not a Democrat or Republican plan. We're going to move forward and accelerate Measure R. And so I'm very excited that that kind of leadership is happening. But with the Measure R opportunities, which are jobs and infrastructure, and with the ARA dollars, I think we can weather through some of the aspects of this incredible crisis we're in. You're nodding your head, Bill. Do you have any more advice for us at this point on how we can move forward with this?
Nothing that wouldn't get me in trouble, so I'll just, no. Thank you. I think you know, the fact that the ARA dollars came available and the city moved very quickly, we're very fortunate. We're fortunate that under the strict federal guidelines that constantly changed over the first 6 months of the actual program, and the fact that we're ahead of schedule on these projects over a 3-year period, we're doing well. We're doing very well. And certainly we could accelerate it, but I think under the current conditions, we're doing the absolutely best job we can. And I think the key is that we stay focused and try to complete these projects by the actual deadline.
Very good.
And we're going to go to street lighting, which has been very patient. John, before you go, how are we doing compared to other big cities with the repaving dollars? One of the things that was reported that we were moving more slowly. Is that accurate? I never had time to compare ourselves to other big cities on...
I don't know, Councilman. I'd have to get back with you on that.
If we could get that as a follow-up to today, I think that's an important measure of how rapidly we're moving to.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much. If I can go to number 2. Mr. Ibrahimian, come on down. So I was very pleased to be out with our Bureau Director and to see some of the conversion of our streetlights to LED lights. A third of our municipal energy that we expend comes from streetlights, and we're engaged in a very ambitious and very successful program so far. But I didn't realize only 8 individuals primarily are doing the installation for it. 4 teams of 2?
Well, good morning, Mr. Chair.
Good morning. Go ahead.
Councilman Rosendahl. Ed Ibrahimian, Director of Bureau of Street Lighting. I have Kearney Marine with me.
Yep.
Well, what you see here is just ARA-funded projects.
No, I know that, yeah.
Now we have an LED program, which is to convert 140,000 lights in the city to LED. That is coming from a loan that we're getting from Department of Water and Power.
Right.
What we have here is $2 million that we received from Energy Efficiency Conservation Block Grant monies. The
So
city...
these were formula dollars that we received just by our population, correct?
Yes,
And
I think we
spend it on
received
how-
$34 million total, and Bureau of Street Lighting received $2 million.
Okay.
And the work here is a little bit different than what you saw
Right.
this week.
Right.
This includes converting the high voltage circuits to low voltage. We have about 20,000 street lights that have high voltage right now that we cannot just go out there and convert and retrofit the fixtures to LED as you saw last Monday. This takes a little bit more work. Actually, the average cost of this work is about $2,500 per fixture. What you saw, what our LED program includes, is about $500 per fixture, complete. So what you see here, the 8 individuals, is for only the $2 million and this ARA-funded project that we have.
So the high voltage conversion that is occurring, does that proceed then switching them to LED, or is it completely separate from it? Keeps them with the same technology, bulbs?
No. This one, we converted to LED also.
Okay.
So we
it's
do
the precursor to doing that.
Yeah, we do convert this high voltage to low voltage, and in addition to that, we converted to LED.
Gotcha.
And that's why we qualified for energy efficiency conservation block grant monies.
And of the 792 that we are seeking to do, how many does that represent? How many high voltage lights do we have left?
We have 20,000 more left that we can use additional ARA funds if it's available to convert. And 792 is from the 20,000 basically.
Okay. And those 20,000 are not covered in our regular LED program right now?
No, it is not. The regular LED program is 140,000, and those are all low voltage multiple circuits. It's a very simple conversion. We call it retrofit. This one is a major construction. We have to change the underground wiring and sometimes the conduit to be able to change the fixtures.
So this was also, this ought to be a, let me just do, about a, what is this, 9-month program?
Yes, actually we are ahead of schedule. Again, as I mentioned, Councilman, sometimes we don't know what the conditions are underground. So initially, we had 592 units that we were to convert. And during the program, because of the efficiencies, because of the fact that we were able to use some of the existing conduit, the work was going forward a little bit faster than we anticipated. So we went ahead and added 200 more additional units to this project. And just want to give you a heads up, the program is scheduled to be completed by June. Between now and June, we may be able to even add additional lights because of other efficiencies that we find during the construction.
So where are we finding the funding to do those additional lights? If it was $2 million and you could only do 800 and now we're doing 1,000, or 600 and now we're doing 800?
Well, the $2 million initially we anticipated to do 600.
Okay.
And then, as during the project, we increased the number, and now we are about 800.
So the cost was actually cheaper of doing the work as well?
Yes,
Okay.
we are doing the work in-house. We are using some Union Hall employees, some of our existing employees, and we are very efficient in what we do. So we've been able to save money and basically expand the scope of the project.
That's great. Okay. I don't have any further questions on
Well,
this.
when I first became Chair of Public Works, when I first joined this august body 5-6 years ago, you were very excited about moving in this direction. And once we were able to move in it, you've obviously gotten on time and faster than time. Yes. And we've been smiling a lot for 2 reasons. One, we save money, don't we, in the long run in terms of energy use?
Yes, we do.
And 2, with the federal support systems now in place, we can accelerate.
Yes, we can.
And right now, if you had, how much more money could you complete this whole project and obviously save us the energy costs? What do you need?
Well, the 20,000 additional high voltage circuits would cost us about $50 million to convert. But whatever we can get right now, we have the resources. Councilman, we are special funded, fully special funded. We don't have furloughs, so our entire operation is special funded. And we have the ability, if we get additional funding, to hire from the Union Hall. And bring temporary workers for special funded programs. And that's what we've done with this program, and also as part of our regular LED program, we've been able to hire additional employees from Union Hall employees. Right now, today, we have 15 employees that we've hired from Union Hall.
So the bottom line is, every dollar you get will automatically translate into a stimulus job creation opportunity. Number 1, jobs. 2, it will, in the long run, in terms of costs of energy, dramatically decrease. So what do you see the value between, say you had $50 million, theoretically. In the long run, how much money would that save us in energy efficiency? And how many more jobs would that create?
Well, our LED program, we've converted about 36,000 lights in the city, and we are saving $1.2 million on the electricity. Now, that one is paid off from the loan, so what is happening, the savings goes back and pays back the loan. So if we were to convert 20,000, we will be able to probably reduce our energy consumption by about $800,000 a year. And that translates to reduction of CO2s also. I mean, you mentioned global warming earlier when Mr. Robertson was here. We are reducing, by reducing our energy consumption, we are also reducing our CO2 print that the city uses here. So
Right, and I know you've done some work in the 11th District, and I'm most grateful for it, and I noticed that you're looking at the LAX area as part of your next strategy going there. When would you get that LAX area done?
Well, you mean converted to LED?
Yeah.
Well, what we're doing, Councilman, this year, we've worked with the police department and we've identified the high crime areas of the city, and we've given priority to convert the lights to LED in the high crime areas of the city.
Because? What does that do?
Because the police department supports the LED. LED is a white light as opposed to the yellowish orange light. You can see colors a lot better. In our opinion, it helps the crime. So overall, we made a decision to prioritize our LED program with the high crime areas of the city. So for the next 6 months, we will be focusing on the high crime areas of the city, and we have already completed approximately 840 in your district, actually, so far this year.
Very good.
And we have more to go. But basically we spread it all over the city and we focus on the high crime areas. Now, LAX area, I'm not sure if it's identified as a high crime area. I have to look into it and to see if that's the case. If that's the case, it will be completed within the next 6 months.
Very good. Well, look, thank you very much for your leadership. I've watched you over the years take this so seriously and to heart, and now we're actually seeing what you've been able to accomplish. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Council.
Thank you. If there's no further questions, we do have a public comment card on this. Arnold Sachs, if you'd like to come forward on item number 2.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. Arnold Sachs. Let me clarify this for this gentleman. I think I could help him out. LAX area, it's a high crime area. It's a high crime area. They're stealing billions of dollars in the revitalization. The cost of the project has gone from $3 to $10 billion quicker than you could blink your eyes. That's high crime. Here's my question. You're talking about accelerating the spending. You're talking about, you mentioned $50 million, and the gentleman said he could do 20,000 lights, high voltage lights. That comes to $2,500 a light. But when you were talking about the $2 million, my math worked out to $4,000 per light, only doing 500 lights.
We're doing 1,000, sir. He said
Excuse me?
We're doing 800, almost close to 1,000. We're doing 800, close to 1,000, just so you can do your calculations.
But are you doing 800 with the $2 million?
Yes, sir.
And they're all high voltage lights?
Yes, sir.
So then, that
It works
comes
out to the same. It's about $2,500.
That comes $2,500.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. You asked a question regarding the stimulus spending. This article, December 26th, mentions that LA has spent 13.3% of its money, while New York had spent 25%, Chicago 47%, Minneapolis 23%, Philadelphia trails LA at 9.6%. But my point, more importantly, is you want to accelerate the spending on the stimulus dollars when it's taken you 2 years, basically, to go through the paperwork to enable you to apply stimulus dollars. That's why you have a 13.6% rate of spending money. So talking about jobs, get the paperwork in order. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to reflect the current statistics, we're close to 30% spent out right now, expended, about $200 million of $629 million. So I think those were older numbers, if I'm not mistaken, that were repeated in the article from an earlier audit, which was months before that. So I think it bears out that repeating that. All right. Thank you all very much. And Mr. Sachs, that was your general public comment when you're talking about that as well? Okay. All right. This meeting of the Ad Hoc Committee on Economic Recovery and Reinvestment is adjourned. We'll begin our council meeting shortly. Thank you all very much.